Good morning, Zubin. Welcome to Caizin Commune podcast, episode 4. Good product managers are great storytellers. Before I jumped right into the topic, I just wanted to give a brief to everyone. First of all, welcome and thank you for doing this for us. And the reason why I'm talking to you specifically about storytelling is because I've really had very interesting conversations with you every time I've met you. All right. So even the smallest of the instances which have happened around you in your life, in your professional life, personal, whatever it may be, you have a flair to kind of just, I won't say exaggerate, but actually make it very interesting. Okay, so you do make it I mean, you do exaggerate, I'm sure, and your usage of all the hyperboles and all the analogies actually make the whole storytelling very interesting. And the reason why I'm talking about product management also with you is because you're running Think 7, and then before that you've also had history with manufacturing. So I just wanted you to kind of introduce yourself, and then we'll get on with the topic.
Uh, yeah. Hey, Ameya, thanks for having I'm very excited to be on this podcast with you. As you know, I do love my storytelling bit. I'm not sure so much about the exaggeration. At least in my head, it's not so exaggerated. I honestly feel that all those experiences that I've had and lived through, which I then tell through my stories, have actually been real. But yeah, sometimes a little mirch masala takes it a step further.
Yes.
But yeah, so I currently run Think 7. I'm one of the co-founders there, and I handle product and the sales marketing aspects of it. Think 7 is a leading Industry 4 solution provider. It's in my favorite space of manufacturing. I've been in manufacturing now 21 years. I love that domain. It's very real, is what I feel, right? And it fits very well with making the stories even more exciting, because there are no dull moments in the manufacturing world in factories.
Oh,
it's always
absolutely.
one challenge after another, and so it's always exciting and interesting.
True. Thank you for that, Zubin. So, um, if I have to pick your brain on just storytelling, right, how much would you attribute that to your innate skills, the skills that you were born with? Or is it something that you probably gained over a period of time?
I think you can learn this. I mean, of course, like all things, some are born storytellers, some achieve storytelling, and some have storytelling thrust upon them. But I don't think it's not possible to learn the skills of telling a good story. Uh, it just takes the fact that you want to put yourself out there the first time, and tell your story, right? Or tell a story. I think it's very much like public speaking. I remember the first time I stood in front of an audience of 300 odd people to present my idea. And this was the same Think 7 idea. This was even before we had written a single line of code. And I didn't know what to say. Firstly, I didn't have a product. It was just an idea. Second, there were 300 people, and I've never spoken to an audience of 300 or even 30 before. And I did my presentation then very, very differently. So rather than, dump everything on the slide, stand behind a podium and read out, I said that slideshow is going to be like my background dancers in a Bollywood movie, right? They're there. They have a role to play. If you take them out, you notice something missing.
Got it.
And when you put them in, it really elevates the dance or the sequence to the next level. But they are not the core of what I wanted to say that day. So a lot of my slides, all they had was a single white dot in the middle of the screen.
Understood.
And the first time that came up, I could see confused looks in the audience, thinking something's wrong with the slideshow. What am I going to do? And I addressed that fact, right? I said, ignore what's behind me. I want you to hear and focus on what I have to say. And I've intentionally kept my slide blank. So I believe storytelling, public speaking, or anything else, really, you can learn along the way as long as you're willing to put yourself out there.
Okay. So probably a lot of things come very inherently to you. So maybe you don't, maybe, so just maybe you don't realize how much effort it probably takes for others to get to that level that you are already out there on, right? And I'm pretty sure your school days were also probably filled with it. I mean, were you a storyteller since when you were a child?
No,
You were
no.
not. Okay.
So I was not. So if you talk about, inter-school, inter-class, inter-house competitions, whether they be elocutions, debates, or any of that, I hardly participated in any of those. I took part in the more fun things,
Okay.
but not the more serious
Understood.
events, or even like things like Just a Minute Jam, where you really have to think on your feet and getting that,
Correct.
the link between
Correct.
one person and the next going. I was not there. I think it came really during my engineering days
Okay.
when we wanted to do our project, and we really had to garner a lot of support from college, from industry, from family and friends. I think that's where it just sort of built up.
Oh, nice.
But I wasn't born a storyteller for sure.
Nice. So in your early days, when you realized that, okay, so even when Think Seven was not I mean, at a concept level, it was nothing demonstrable at that stage. Did you feel that you need to develop some sort of a conviction so that the story would seem believable of sorts? Or did you
Oh,
directly address the problem and the conflict and the
oh no,
typical
no, no.
storytelling pattern?
Absolutely not. I mean, you have to be 100% convicted to what you're saying.
Right.
Storytelling is not a bunch of lies.
Correct.
Uh, yeah, it's not fiction,
Correct.
right? It's non-fiction. It's reality
Right.
just made interesting.
True.
And if you believe that storytelling is just to fool someone else, I mean, it'll take you from step zero to step one, and that's it. You're never going to get beyond that.
True.
Uh, yeah, even today, when I talk to customers, there's still so much we want to do with Think 7 at Think 7, which is not there. We're not there yet.
True.
But I still tell my stories because I know for a fact that we have the capability, and we have the direction to get there. But I also make it abundantly clear to whoever my audience is, whether it's a group of people, a single person, that this is future, right? This is the direction we're going. And this is why I believe that direction will really help you and me, you as my client and me as
Right.
the vendor, in getting real results. So storytelling, you have to be 100%, uh, you have to have 100% belief in what that core of
Correct.
the message is.
But does the delivery change? Like, does the delivery of the same story change when you're talking
Of
one-on-one
course.
in an informal setup versus then you're in a conference room with, let's say, a handful crowd, and then at a mass scale, like you're addressing like a whole auditorium of sorts? Does that change? And what are the nuances between them?
Of course it changes, right? Because if you're having a one-on-one
Correct.
conversation,
Right.
it's a conversation. It's not a monologue.
Right.
But the minute you get in a smaller group, you still want to keep the interesting aspect of a conversation going.
Correct.
But there are challenges because everyone has their own questions, stories, points of
Right.
view that they want to express. And the larger the group, you can't afford to do that because then your story gets lost in the noise.
True.
So you have to be able to change from a dialogue to a semi-dialogue to a monologue,
Correct.
depending on the audience, depending on the audience's capabilities, their interests, and of course, the size.
Right. But is there any such thing like one is tougher than the other or easier of sorts? Because I have had really, so I'll tell you something. I've had many one-on-one conversations which have really tanked. Okay, I mean you go with an intent. So this happens generally when you take the product to the users first, then to the customers who are going to pay for the product, and then to the stakeholders who have commissioned the product. Right. So at three different stages, it's quite possible that the same story gets narrated in a very different manner, right? So you're trying to make users world, change their world, improve their world. You're trying to tell the people who are going to pay for it that this is the value for your money, and this is what you're going to get at the end of the day, and this is how I convert $1 to that business value. Versus when you go to the stakeholders and who are going to commission the product, they're going to say, I don't need this product. I mean, it's okay if they, even if they want it, right? I mean, you find people at both the sides of the spectrum, like people who want their to give the right tools in the hand of the people so they become effective and efficient and all of that stuff. And then there is the other case where these are mandate products saying, which happened during COVID also, right? People actually started monitoring employee activity just to know that they are active throughout the day. And there were companies. So those were mandate products saying you have to install this application on your machine. You have to keep your camera on, etc., etc. Those were mandate products. So in my head, actually addressing a medium segment crowd, like a crowd of, let's say, 7 to 8 people, where the conversation can be flowing through, exactly like how you said, the PowerPoint is just sitting behind, but we're actually talking to multiple people. That is the time when I can pick some commonalities and address to those commonalities between all those people sitting there. They have a vested interest other than salary, of course, to being there on that table. And then it is much easier for me, at least in my head, to address that common concern and then lead on that and then develop more on it and then talk to different people and see which part of the spectrum they are in. During the conversation, especially if it is a long conversation, I actually make people rotate their seats also. So they're like, okay, let's change around 15 minutes. Just like a role reversal of sort. Now you're sitting on, not explicitly, but implicitly sitting on his chair. What do you think now? Do you have a better perspective of sorts? So those kind of leading conversations are helpful. But this one-on-one conversation, they scare the out of me. And because what I feel is it has more added pressure on understanding what the opposite person's preferences are. So it actually, so when you, especially when you do analogies, right? So you don't know what kind of analogies you can take. So you have to always play the neutral ground first. You don't know that his political preferences. You don't know how emotionally triggered or how soon or how lesser he is, how versatile is he in his choices of maybe hobbies or external activities that he may pursue. I happen to give certain analogies with music and art and sometimes sports, and they completely tank because the opposite person has no clue what I'm talking about. So the humor tanks, the the analogies tank. There is a lot of stuff which goes on in the background which does not really land the way you always perceive it to. So where I was leading to was the presence of mind. How important is that to actually land a particular story?
Very. So this is, it's a comparison between a movie and a play.
Correct.
Right? A movie is pre-recorded. A play is live in front of your audience. Uh, so many things can go wrong in a play. Nothing can go wrong in a movie in terms of the execution. I mean, if the story is bad, the story is bad.
Correct.
But in terms of execution, you mess up, you take a retake. That's already shot.
Right.
But on stage, when you're doing live in front of your audience, there is no retake. But so coming back to a particular point you raised about talking to different stakeholders, it's not the same story when you're talking to those same different stakeholders, right? It's a different story. It's a different movie.
It's a different story, right?
It's a different story. So I believe when you go in, of course, doing your homework on who your audience is, either one or many, who they are, what is their incentive to be there and to listen to you is very important. But it's also very important to realize that if you make a mistake or you perceive you're making a mistake in your storytelling, nobody knows. It's only in your head where you know where you wanted that joke to land, where you wanted that punchline to come, that emphasis to come. And even if it didn't come, they don't know that this is what you had planned in your head. For them, it's just a sentence that you made or you said, and it's water under the bridge.
Right.
So I think that point, that pressure we put on ourselves, right? That oh my God, that joke it fell flat. And then we get conscious about what we're going to say next, then really starts affecting our delivery, our storytelling, our conversations beyond that. It's just that own sort of idea of how it should have gone versus how it's actually going.
Right. Oh, so true. Yes. But then has it ever happened with you that the conversation has started and midway somewhere you felt very disconnected? Like either the opposite person is listening but completely misunderstanding you. So how do you handle those kind of conversations?
I have had people fall asleep.
Okay.
All right. Now
That is
you try having a conversation with someone who's not listening. It's bad.
right.
You try having a conversation with someone who's snoring. It's impossible. It's impossible. Fortunately, that's never happened on a one-on-one setting. It's always happened in small groups. In larger groups, it doesn't matter. But in the 7, 8 people, if one key member is snoring away, it's
Yeah.
very disconcerting for
Yes.
everybody. It's
Correct.
embarrassing for the rest of the team who's there, his team, and it's very disturbing for you. Whether do you continue, do you not, do you also snore? Uh, so it's very. I mean, conversations can go very, very wrong. But at the end of the day, I think what we need to realize is we need to pre-decide what outcome we want for ourselves rather than what outcome we want for our audience.
Correct. So
That outcome is in our hands, right?
true. So yeah, you're basically the director of the story that you're telling. Yeah.
Absolutely,
So you can
yeah. So I
navigate the
always
medium.
go in. Yeah, I always go in for a meeting, whether it's a sales meeting, a teams, whatever, internal teams, whatever it is. I always go in for them saying, hey, I just want to have fun. And that's about it. Now, no one can take that away from me,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
I mean, you can say you don't have fun, but you can't say, hey, listen, Zubin, I will make sure you don't have fun. That doesn't happen.
Right. Correct.
So once I figured that out, again, that's off late, uh, that I control my result, and if I'm sort of happy with the way I have done and I've had fun doing it, in most cases, again, not in all cases, in most cases, the meeting goes well.
Right. Right. Yeah, because then it's your own energy and vibe that you're actually kind of broadcasting and getting people on board as well, right? So yeah, so what
Correct.
we're going to do is we both are going to tell one story each. Do you have your story ready?
No, I don't. I'm going to come up with it.
Yes. Before we go there, so I just wanted to kind of summarize. So we spoke of people and the audience from a outreach perspective, right? I also do believe that storytelling is important inwards as well. So in your ability to inspire and excite your people to deliver this particular solution, to kind of motivate them to do their best and giving them a sense of achievement that what this was the real problem. This is how exhilarated the users are when you actually hand this over to in their hands. And then the second point is you actually make more people part of the solution and you're not left alone anymore. So when you relate your problems, when you relate that solution with multiple people, make it interesting for them, you're actually taking a buy-in of sorts, right? Increase participation of people, whether it is in problem solving or whether it is in innovation. In both of those areas, you're giving them a compelling reason to work towards that problem, which so in my head, these are the two primary reasons. And then of course, the other aspects of storytelling is when you go really by the technical part of it, saying there is an actor in a story, there is a projection that you need to do, you have to introduce a conflict, then gain empathy in storytelling itself, and then have a victorious end. There may be stories which don't really end very well. That's fine as well. Not all stories are going to have a great end, but everybody loves happy ending, right?
I think that's very important. See, especially if you're building a company, right? You still don't have systems and processes in place. Everything is evolving.
Right.
Your product is evolving. Your story is evolving. Your
Right.
customer base, your target audience is evolving. Your internal control systems, measurables, those you start with nothing,
Right.
and those evolve. Also, the roles that people have to play in year one, you need sort of multitaskers, people who can switch context very quickly, can handle operations and sales and support and development or whatever. But then as you grow, you want a little more specialists rather than generalists. And then you
Right.
want like rigid structures. How do you get people to change? Because changing people's behaviors is the toughest thing to do, unless you go with the whip. I mean, not physically, but unless you go with a danda and say, no, this is the only way. It's a fight. But that internal story, I believe, is more important than the external story. Because if you can tell that internal story well, you a lot of things get solved internally, and the team then, because they believe in it, can translate and communicate that same thing. Maybe not 100% effectively on the same way you would do it, but at least 80-90% there,
Right.
that it's a great starting point and a great way to scale up your external facing interactions. So I think that internal bit is more important than the external.
Got it. Got it. Okay, I will go first. I have a short story. It might take about 5 minutes. But this happened when I was working for a fintech company. It's an MNC company, a product-based company again. So I had already started working for products into fintech space. So the kind of data that used to handle the large volumes of data, that was something which I'd already started doing. And this was a time when big data was not really a thing. I mean, it had just started. People had started to hear about it. Data analytics or data driven decisions, they were really foreign terms, and people didn't really understand how data was to be used for inferences, right? So in this fintech company that I was working for, they were doing budgeting and forecasting. Okay, and when you do budgeting for any company, you know that it just involves like collecting all stream of expenses, collecting all stream of direct and indirect incomes, and you basically reconcile, and then you can use that data to do a forecast or budget your next year. And because of certain acts and regulations or compliances, you generally have to forecast for the next 3 to 5 years, depending on what industry you are. Now, what happens is these budgets and obviously the forecast, they can actually go completely haywire depending on many other external factors, which they may not have perceived in year zero. And year fifth, your budget could be completely off gear, right? So, I mean, by nobody anticipated a war, nobody anticipated fuel prices going up, nobody anticipated forex conversion rates or gold going down in the long run. So these kind of aspects which affect indirectly to the business, they actually put your budget off gear as well. However, from a stability perspective, a corporate, a financial prudence perspective, these budgets are important, and the government kind of puts a mandate on these corporations and you have to put the budgets out. So this was the time when the company said, okay, you know what? It looks like everybody's using data. And in finance, because accounting practices don't really change year on year, they pretty much remain consistent for a very long time. We do have access to a lot of data within corporations. So if we latch on to their ERP, we should be able to get their actuals of the past and work on that data and actually project a 1 year's entire budget and save a whole lot of manual effort for them. So they don't actually have to manually collate all the ledgers together, take a look at the expenses, take a look at the projections, take a look at provisioning certain expenses or provisioning even income, anticipated income, when you have growth plans per se. So you have to invest and then you have an ROI of 3 years. When you actually plan that way, you have to ensure that you have got your ROI in that 3 years, and then you do certain kind of a variance. So everything was in place. We did first pass of the product, which took like less than a year. We did exactly this. We got the data from the past. We were looking at this year's actuals. We did a simple heuristic comparison of the data and presented a next year's budget. And we were extremely happy, like, okay, great. Like this is still millions of records. There is a budgeting team within large corporations, which amounts somewhere between 40 to 50 people with good amount of experience, because you don't want things to go wrong when you're doing a particular projection. Everything was great. I was traveling to US and we were presenting this product. I was the architect of the product, and I had a product manager. When he was not designated a product manager, the term was new then, so he was still somebody of the product and owner of the product of sorts. And we both were talking to people saying, okay, you know what, this is this. And it was a 7-day trip, and we had lined up conversations with almost 8 to 10 of the prospects that we had. Now we had 2 or 3 referenceable customers who said, okay, we will put some money on this and then you can build it and then you can service the product for us. Now, when it came to growth stage or kind of moving out of the whole short gamut of things, saying now we need to get a next round of customers, we were failing like drastically. Like nobody kind of really related to the pain that we were trying to address. The manual effort we were trying to save for creating a budget, it felt that it was probably in the more disorganized corporations who were probably not using automation to do this job in the first place. So that kind of put us out of gear. Like we thought, okay, if everybody's doing ERP, if they have SAP, if they have Dynamics, they probably are sorted out. There is Hyperion, there were other ERP systems as well. But that was not the case. It is very easy to go wrong with these large softwares also, right? So when we spoke to a lot of big corporations, we realized that this is not the real pain. And the whole week kind of was sort of wasted. And we had decided that, okay, we will party at the end of the week because we would have won so many deals and then go back to India and build another next level of the product, etc. And nothing happened. But we still decided to party. Okay, so we still went ahead and we were like, okay, forget it. Okay, we will have a next round of customers, probably revise our pitch and come back. And if this is not the pain, then we'll probably have to address the product also in that particular manner, saying this forecast is not auto-generated and stuff. What happened was, in that particular party, when we were having our beers, a gentleman walks in, and he was one of the members in that particular conference room we had spoken to on that day. So he's like, you guys have a great product, but I am probably not going to buy it if you're going to sell it to me like that. So it obviously we didn't understand what is he talking about. And the next statement he says, which actually stayed with me for a very long time, was he's saying, this is a product which cannot be sold in a conference room. And to which we were both zapped. And like, what is he talking about? Like, what exactly is he talking about? So what he said was, you need to understand how finances work. There are heavy approximations across the board. You have to gauge the level of trust people have in their own numbers. So the CEO or the CFO looking at the numbers, if he knows that he has to add plus minus 5% to actually start believing in those numbers, or he has heavy mistrust in that particular data, and for no reason really. It's not like he mistrusts people, he mistrusts data. So he says, you're not selling it the right way. What you need to bridge the gap, you need to bridge the gap of that trust. So we were like, okay, what happens? Do people intentionally make these mistakes? So he's like, mistakes are always intentional. In the world of finance, you need to understand that mistakes are planned and they are also projected in that particular manner. Because you want to keep the government happy and the public happy at large, people do project very conservatively. They have ambitious plans. They do not want to probably put it out in the public, because public is going to probably misread it 3 years down the line, saying you promised this way back 3 years ago and now you're not delivering. So he was like, an elephant, the teeth he shows versus the teeth he eats with are different. And that is exactly what happens with budgets. So he gave us a great idea. We went back home and we were like, we need to get on a meeting. Please let us know what we can do to do this. And he was like, you have the perfect product, you're just selling it in the wrong manner. So you tell them, you give them certain metrics to alter the forecasted budget. And we did that. And we have one budget. So now this budget is actually the one which is computed by data algorithms. Statistically, everything is right. The second budget is the budget which you want to inform or want to broadcast, right? And that has different parameters altogether. They do variance with both of them. The one which is an ideal budget that we want, an aspirational budget of sorts. The other budget which is actually broadcasted and has a public value to it. Okay, now how to correlate these with actual numbers, and that is where the pain lies. And because when you try to make mistakes intentionally, you will go wrong, right? And everybody knows that. It's like this is an unsaid thing which nobody's going to talk about it in conference room. But if you choose to talk to them outside of their professional NDA zone, then you will probably realize that what the real pain is. And without actually speaking of this product, even if you demonstrate a feature like that you can do multiple budgets for a year and do baselining and compare the baseline as well. How far were you from your actuals? How far were you from your aspiration budget versus how far were you than how you perform? I think you have a win there. And yes, the product is still in the market today and doing extremely well.
Oh, but I've taken something away from this story that you just narrated.
Oh, tell me.
I think this trust deficit, it exists everywhere, right? Finance, of course, any company. I mean, the reason for its existence is the money. I mean, even if you are a not-for-profit, you still need the money to run tomorrow. So at the end of the day, you still need to look at revenues and expenses and all of that. So, but it's the concept or the theory of this trust deficit and the way you address it, I think is what my takeaway is, because when we go as Think 7, it's the same thing. In a manufacturing setup, almost 60 to 70% of your costs, value creation or destruction, happens on the shop floor. So efficiency, small efficiency gains on the shop floor can have huge impacts on the bottom line. Right? You can cut lighting in your office. You can optimize your air conditioning. You can, shave off some staff, which does nothing. It's all, PR stunts. But the real numbers can really come in from small changes on the shop floor. And like that, companies measure their efficiencies. And almost all managers, plant heads, VPs, EDs, owners, MDs, etc., have their percentage of compensation that they apply themselves. And for the same company, different people will be applying a different factor of safety to the numbers that they are presented. Again, it's not that the people collecting, collating, and computing those numbers are intentionally making a mistake. It's just that they are incentivized to do it quickly, which is impossible when you're doing it manually, and they're incentivized to show higher numbers. So as far as they can, they will present internally higher numbers. But the MD is sitting in the meeting and he sees my efficiency 70%. In his head, he knows, hey, it's not. I'm discounting it by 15, 20% at least. And to get that buy-in, I think what you said, you cannot sell it in a conference room. Because there will be people saying, no, our numbers are true. So they're going to get pushback. And once you get pushback, there's disbelief in your product. There's distrust that's set in. So you want to really tell different stories to different people. Coming back to one of the first points, you got to tell them separately. You sit with the top management, you tell them a different story one-on-one. You sit with the users, you're not telling them that, your numbers are fake and made up, but you're just going to tell them how it's going to make their life easier and simpler and whatever the numbers be. Right. So good. That was my takeaway in terms of how you sell the trust.
Awesome. Excellent.
Rather than the story.
You did latch on to the perfect points that I was intending to convey. So, okay, good. I'll pat on my back in that case.
Okay. I also have to, I'm going to tread on broken glass. Hopefully I don't say things which can come back and bite me. But when it comes to a storytelling, right? So this was in my first company, the manufacturing organization that we had. When I joined, that was over 20 years ago, I joined when we had one customer left, right? It was recession time. It was bad times in the Indian automotive industry. We were supplying a couple of components for the Toyota Qualis. And as luck would have it, the Qualis was end of life in India. And a year later, they phased it out and introduced the Innova, the first Innova. And a lot of the parts, these were all sheet metal stampings, were replaced with plastic. So those orders normally would, if the similar part of the next gen or the next model would come to the same supplier, but that didn't come to us because they were of a different material. So within a year of joining, I started with one customer, I ended up with 0. But I still had to do something. So I started approaching a lot of new customers all across the country. And I would get, so first of all, I was like a 22-year-old, right? So a kid. And people would say, who are your customers? And I would say, no one, you would be my first. And I would get shown the door and they would say, come back when you have someone else. And it was frustrating as hell because I needed one customer, right? So I could tell the next guy, hey, so-and-so is my client, and then build it from there. And this went on for a couple of years. I tried different things. to keep the business going. But I really needed that one anchor customer who would give me that first purchase order. It didn't come for a very, very long time until I got a client who said, okay, I want to come and see your facility. I said, wow, at least that's my first positive step, because otherwise I would be kicked out of their offices. At least now I had someone saying, I'm willing to come and see your place. And then I had to hold on to him, right? I had to make sure that I don't let him go.
Right.
So what I did have, I mean, I was lucky in that sense that the foundation was there. The factory was there, the machines were there, processes, people. I mean, small team, but there was people. So that was there. I didn't have to struggle for that. So what I did when this client came in, and I hope they're not listening, I hired contract labor for a day. I loaded every single machine that was there on the factory, and I produced crap. Anything. I said those machines have to run. That's it. And when the customer came, he saw a factory that's buzzing with activity. There was parts being produced, there was material being moved, there were people around, milling around, working, blah, blah, blah. And I took him around and I explained where those products went. I never told him, I never lied. I never told him who we sold them to. I said, this goes into so-and-so bike, this goes into so-and-so truck, this goes into so-and-so car. I didn't say this very part is being sold to so-and-so customer, right? As luck would have it, he bought that story and I got my first purchase order, very, very small, but I managed to get my first purchase order. That customer, I'm not associated with the company any longer, the manufacturing organization, but that customer is still a client of that company now nearly 20 years later.
Wow.
So, storytelling, like I said, you can't lie, because a lie will only take you that far. You have to be very, very clear of what you're doing, what's your objective, what's your intention. Eventually, I also told the same purchase guy who came down, I said, hey, I did this. I hope you don't mind. So he said, yeah, that's fine. But you're right. If I'd seen an empty factory, I would have probably turned around, done a 180 and walked right out. Probably had your tea or coffee and then vamos.
Oh, awesome. How awesome is that?
Right. So, but English or whatever language you're telling your story in will only take you so far. After that, it's your delivery, it's your execution, it's everything else. That storytelling ability is not going to get you across the finish line. It's going to get you past the start line, but it's not going to get you past the finish line. The finish line, you need to run.
Yes.
Yeah.
So those are your words, and I'm taking them. Okay. I will definitely be using them in the future for sure. But yeah, that's an amazing insight. So thank you so much. Before we end this podcast, let's just end it on the note of Samsung versus Apple. I think it's going to be an eternal battle, which is going to be fought on the field for a very long time. You are an Apple guy. I am a Samsung guy. This is my third Samsung phone, in fact. Not promoting Samsung per se, but this is where the storytelling comes into being, right? The Apple has most loyal customer base. That is because Apple sells stories, it sells emotions. Samsung sells features. So I guess each one has, because the pricing is not very different, given that the components probably are interchangeably used in the same devices. So the pricing is not very different. But apart from that, when you attract a particular segment, customer segment, by features versus you attract by emotions and addressing the capability, you get more loyalty in return. So storytelling does exactly that. You're addressing the human factor, because ultimately it's all about people. People are generating, producing things, people are consuming things. So they cannot be neglected, of course. So it's not just about the capability or the offering or the service that a particular product or a company is providing, but it's also about the consumers at the end of the day. Any concluding thoughts?
Yeah, that's a very good comparison. In fact, I will draw that comparison back to your story that you just narrated a couple of minutes ago of your presentation in the US, the first product you talked about, the budgeting product.
Yeah.
At the bar, your client who was there in that audience told you something. He said, your product is excellent. You just said you sold it in the wrong manner. You sold it for its specifications. You sold it for its capabilities. You never sold it for its trust. That trust is an emotion. The specification and the capabilities are just that. It makes a great product. Right? I think what Apple does well, like you said, they sell emotions, they sell aspirations. If you compare spec for spec, Apple's probably way down, the pecking order. But one is they suck you into the ecosystem very well. But that they do that by telling you a good story. They do that by then maintaining the ease of being in that ecosystem. It's not that they got you in and then you struggle to stay in. They get you in through their storytelling, and then you choose to stay in because everything just works seamlessly together. This example, I am on a MacBook right now. I have some notes on an iPad next to me. My mouse goes from my MacBook to my iPad seamlessly. I don't have a separate pointing device. I don't need to take, my hands off or do the touchscreen. I can scroll using the same pointing device that I'm already using. I think that's what they do really well. I extending this comparison between Microsoft and AWS as well. AWS, again, Microsoft with Azure has changed, has made it easier to stay within their ecosystem. I've been off AWS for a while, but I believe AWS came up with a lot of disparate systems. They would work together, but you really need to have a technical wherewithal, bandwidth, capabilities to get them to work together. Absolutely. And Microsoft Azure, at least a couple of years ago, and I'm sure AWS has caught up, but like I said, I've been off it. I just click, and things just worked then.
Right. So they have, even Microsoft, right? They've stayed true to their ecosystem and their customer base. They have never alienated their customers, right? Never, ever. So because they know that the enterprises actually bank on them, rely on them, and they have played to that strength. I do sense a certain level of audacity that Apple exercises.
Of course.
Yeah, and then and they still decorate that with a story. So they are still giving you a reason for having the earpods, or another reason for not having a charger in the box, or whatever it may be. They do accompany that with a story. So whether it is sustainability reasons or
$20 charger or whatever, 1,000 rupee charger that you have to buy extra, they story told that so well.
Yes.
They made more people go out and buy phones thinking that they're helping the environment by buying an Apple phone because it came without the charger.
Correct.
It's probably a cheap cost-cutting move. That's all it is. It saved shipping, it saved box packing, it saved all of that. That's all cost-cutting. But they packaged it as your CO2 emissions and your carbon footprint and whatnot. Right. And that's the beauty about storytelling, right? You're not lying.
Correct.
You're just telling the truth in a different way.
Absolutely. So true. Zubin, thank you so much for doing this. It's always been a pleasure talking to you. I do want to repeat this on some another topic I'll pick your brain on.
Lots to talk. If you'll have to dedicate a whole season. I would love to be on it. But all the best. It has been great. It's been great chatting with you on this. All the best for the podcast.
So much. Thank you.
It's going to be looking forward to listening to all of them. It's been amazing.
For sure.
Thanks.
It should come up tomorrow. Bye-bye.